Harold Grayson sat on the worn-out porch swing of his modest home in Willow Creek, a small town nestled in the rolling hills of Tennessee. At 70, his hands bore the scars of a life hard-lived, calloused from years in the Army, weathered from decades of manual labor to provide for his family. His gray eyes, once sharp with the vigilance of a soldier, now softened with age, stared out at the quiet street. The only sound was the creak of the swing, and the distant hum of cicadas. In his lap rested a crumpled envelope, the return address stamped with the logo of a Nashville production company. He didn't need to open it to know what it contained, another plea from his son, Tommy, for money. Harold had always believed in Tommy. At 32, his only child had a voice that could hush a room, a raw talent for songwriting that seemed to pour straight from his soul. When Tommy moved to Nashville 5 years ago to chase his dream of becoming a country music star, Harold didn't hesitate to help. He'd cashed out part of his pension, taken odd jobs, and sent check after check to cover studio time, guitar strings, and rent for a cramped apartment in Music City. "You're gonna make it, son," Harold would say, his voice thick with pride. "Just keep singing." But the envelope in his hands felt different. It wasn't just another request, it was a confession. A week ago, Tommy had called, his voice slurred with excitement or maybe something stronger, and let slip the truth. The last $10,000 Harold had sent wasn't for studio time or a producer. It had paid for a music video, complete with rented sports cars, hired dancers, and a director who promised to make Tommy look like a star. Harold's heart sank as Tommy rambled about the shoot, describing flashing lights and a penthouse set that screamed excess. Not a single note had been recorded. Harold tore open the envelope, his fingers trembling. Inside was a glossy photo of Tommy posing in front of a cherry-red convertible, surrounded by women in sequin dresses. A note was scrawled on the back, "Dad, this is gonna put me on the map. One more check and I'm set. Promise." Harold's chest tightened. He'd given everything, his savings, his trust, his belief, and Tommy had squandered it on a fantasy. He set the photo down and stood, his knees creaking as he walked inside. The house was quiet, too quiet since his wife, Margaret, passed 3 years ago. Her absence still lingered in the empty spaces, the kitchen where she'd hum while baking, the living room where they'd dance to old records. Harold had poured himself into Tommy's dream to fill that void, but now it felt like betrayal. He was done. The next morning, Harold drove to the Willow Creek Veterans Center, a squat brick building where he'd spent countless hours since returning from Vietnam in '73. He'd never joined the activities, preferring to sit quietly with a coffee and listen to the chatter of other vets. But today, as he walked in, a flyer on the bulletin board caught his eye: "Join the Willow Creek Veterans Choir. Rehearsals every Thursday. All voices welcome," Harold snorted. Singing. He hadn't sung since he was a kid, belting hymns in church with a voice that cracked more than it carried. But something about the flyer tugged at him. Maybe it was the promise of camaraderie, or maybe it was the need to do something for himself after years of giving to Tommy. He scribbled his name on the sign-up sheet before he could change his mind. That Thursday, Harold found himself in a circle of folding chairs, surrounded by a dozen veterans ranging from their 50s to their 80s. There was Frank, a wiry Korean War vet with a baritone that rumbled like gravel, Maria, a Gulf War medic who sang alto with a quiet intensity, and Jim, a Vietnam buddy of Harold's who claimed he only joined for the free coffee. The choir director, a spry woman named Clara with a shock of white hair, clapped her hands to quiet the group. "All right, folks," Clara said, her voice bright. We're here to make music, not excuses. Let's start with America the Beautiful. Harold, you're new, give us a note. Harold froze, his throat dry. I ain't much of a singer, he muttered, neither was I till I tried, Clara shot back, winking. Open your mouth and let's see what happens. He did, hesitantly at first, his voice rough and unsteady. But as the choir joined in, something shifted. The harmony wrapped around him, lifting his voice, steadying it. For the first time in years, Harold felt a spark of joy, a sense of belonging that had nothing to do with sacrifice or obligation. He was singing for himself, weeks turned into months, and Harold became a fixture in the choir. He practiced at home, humming old folk songs and gospel hymns, rediscovering a voice he'd forgotten he had. Clara noticed his progress and gave him a solo in Shenandoah, a song that brought tears to the eyes of the audience at their first community performance. Harold stood tall, his weathered face glowing under the community center's fluorescent lights, and sang with a depth that spoke of loss, resilience, and hope. Word spread. The Willow Creek Veterans Choir was invited to perform at a regional veterans event, then a state fair. A local news station caught wind of their story, a group of aging vets finding purpose through song, and aired a segment that went viral online. Soon, the choir was booked for gigs across Tennessee, and Harold's solo became the highlight. People started calling him the Singing Vet, a nickname he brushed off with a shy grin, but fame, even small-town fame, came with complications. Tommy called one evening, his voice dripping with excitement. "Dad, I saw you on TV. You're blowing up. Listen, I've got an idea, let's do a duet. Father and son, the Grayson boys. It'll be huge." Harold gripped the phone, his jaw tight. "You didn't call when I sent you money," he said. "Didn't call when your mother passed. Now you want in on this?" Tommy laughed, too smooth. "Come on, Dad. I'm the one who got you into music. You used to sing to me when I was a kid. This is our story." Harold hung up without a word. The audacity stung. Tommy hadn't just misused the money, he was trying to rewrite their history, to claim credit for Harold's hard-won moment. The betrayal cut deeper than the wasted dollars. The choir's biggest performance yet was scheduled at the Tennessee State Veterans Gala, a black-tie event in Nashville attended by politicians, donors, and media. The choir was set to close the night with a medley of American folk songs, and Harold had a solo in "This Land Is Your Land." As he practiced, he couldn't shake the thought of Tommy. He'd heard through a mutual friend that Tommy was in Nashville, telling anyone who'd listen that he'd inspired his father's singing career. The lie gnawed at Harold, but he pushed it aside. This was his moment, not Tommy's. The night of the gala, the auditorium was packed. Harold stood backstage, his choir robe itchy but his heart steady. The choir's performance was flawless, their voices weaving together like a tapestry of shared stories. When Harold stepped forward for his solo, the room fell silent. His voice, weathered yet powerful, filled the space, each note carrying the weight of his life: war, loss, love, and now, redemption. The applause was thunderous. As Harold bowed, Clara whispered, "You're a star, Harold." He smiled, but his eyes scanned the crowd. There in the third row was Tommy, clapping louder than anyone, a grin plastered on his face. Harold's stomach churned. After the performance, as the choir mingled with the audience, Tommy approached, a reporter trailing behind him. "That's my dad," Tommy announced, loud enough for heads to turn. "I taught him everything he knows about music. We're working on a project together, big things coming." The reporter, a young woman with a notepad, looked intrigued. A father-son music duo. That's a great story. Mr. Grayson, can you tell us more? Harold's blood boiled. He'd spent years supporting Tommy, only to be used again. This wasn't just a lie, it was theft. He took a deep breath, his soldier's discipline kicking in, and turned to the reporter. "Ma'am," he said, his voice steady but firm, "my son's got away with words, but he's got no part in this. I joined this choir to find something for myself after he spent my savings on a music video instead of his music. I believed in him, but he didn't believe in me. This," he gestured to the choir behind him, "this is mine." The crowd went quiet. Tommy's grin faltered, his face reddening. "Dad, come on, don't do this," he stammered. "Do what?" Harold said, louder now. "Tell the truth. You took my money, Tommy. You took my trust. And now you want my moment." "No. I'm done." The reporter scribbled furiously, sensing a story far juicier than a feel-good duet. Tommy opened his mouth, then closed it, his bravado crumbling. He turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. In the weeks that followed, the story of the singing vet took on a new layer. The media latched onto Harold's confrontation, painting him as a man who'd found his voice, literally and figuratively, after years of sacrifice. Offers came in, a record deal for the choir, a guest spot on a national morning show, even a small role in a documentary about veterans finding purpose. Harold took it all in stride, grateful but grounded. He never heard from Tommy again. Part of him ached for his son, for the boy he'd once sung to sleep with old folk tunes. But another part, the part that had carried him through war and loss, knew he'd made the right choice. He'd given Tommy everything, but the last check was for himself. Harold stood on his porch one evening, the swing creaking as he hummed Shenandoah. The cicadas sang back, and for the first time in years, he felt whole. He wasn't just a father or a veteran or a widower. He was Harold Grayson, the singing vet, and his song was his own.